Hi everyone coming in. We got folks streaming in. I'm glad this Monday actually falls on a President's Day, so we or whatever you may choose to call it. Um, so while we let folks pour in, I'm so excited to be chatting once again with Ruth Ben-Ghiat, scholar of fascism and other highly of the moment au courant topics.
Sadly,
Um,
sadly
yeah,
relevant.
sadly, yeah. And as you're pouring in, our ritual with these live shows has been to tell us where you're coming in from. Folks already know geographically, but also emotionally. So you can give us a place and a more kind of metaphysical
A state of
place that you're
mind.
coming. A state of
A s-
mind, a state of heart.
I woke up kind of fed up with everything, and then so I'm glad we're here together because being together is part of surviving this for the long term, the long
Yes.
haul.
Yes. It's wild, isn't it? So we're gonna get started while folks pour in, because I want to reward the early comers. Um, so I want to actually start the conversation today, if it's okay with you, Ruth, with something hopeful today, which is that at this very hour, in in places across this country, people are meeting in protest. These 50501
Hmm.
movement. And I wonder, you've thought so much, you and I've talked about a pro democracy movement, whether we have one, what it would take to have one. Do you think we're starting to see the seeds of something that feels to you like a real pro democracy movement that, has some of what it takes?
I think so. I mean, we've got certain people in the Democratic Party, so from the institution, that party institution stepping forward. Chris Murphy, I know you're speaking with him, I guess tomorrow, right? Maxwell Fra, other people, and we've got disparate things, and um, I believe that they will come together. We've got public protests starting, and we have to you know we can't expect this to happen immediately because we have been living through what I call in my book a shock event, right? I don't use the word shock and awe, but shock event when things have been happening very quickly. So it's best to resist once you know what's happening. There are things you can resist without knowing the big picture that are injustices, each of them in their own right worth protesting. But um, I think that if people were disappointed there wasn't an instant outpouring, things are a little different this time doesn't mean it's not going to happen.
What's so striking is that I think we all knew this was going to be bad, but the sense of deluge has been so overwhelming, even for people I know who are,
Yep.
journalists who've covered wars,
Yep.
who are like used to people like you who've like studied the worst things and stared at the worst things in the face for much of your career. The deluge of the moment is very difficult. In the New York Times, M. Gesson wrote a really interesting column recently about how, like, in some ways, this is the purpose of autocrats
Yep.
is to deluge you with like dumb stuff that you have to react dumbly to,
Yep.
and everybody's then just like treading water in dumbness, like talking about the Gulf of America. Um, can you,
Yep.
but can you talk about how you see, just maybe personally, how are you dealing with deluge and reaction versus, let's say, what this pro democracy movement is trying to do, or what M. Gesson talks about, which is like we actually need to articulate and build and model something positive and affirming and awesome in comparison. How are you dealing with that balance of the necessity of reaction and
Yeah.
not getting stuck in the autocrats game of reacting to stupidity?
Yeah, I guess, and I'm like, example of like, I predicted a lot of this stuff. I know it theoretically. I thought that Trump 1.0 was much worse than others. I've been named in a suit by Trump against CNN. We've all been through our things, and yet, um, when the speed at which it's happening, and it makes it even for me, of course, going through it as an American, difficult. So what I've been trying to do, I've canceled a lot of stuff so that I could have more time to think. I'm spending more time with friends and family and community stuff, but I'm also paring down things because for me personally, it's very important to be able to, again, as I said, see the big picture because you have to be strategic. That's also what M. Gesson, who wrote a book called Surviving Autocracy, and it comes from Putin's Russia, um, is that you will exhaust yourself if you try and react to everything. And so being strategic and understand where to, each of us has our own talents, and understanding how you can best help, because you can't help in every way, right? But you can help in some ways that are that follow your own gifts. And I think if you do public things, you know what is valuable to people, and so you follow that. And you follow your heart and you follow your conscience. um and there it's harder because it's we have, of course, people are coming in saying I'm pissed off too. I'm like jumping out of my skin with righteous anger. And so we need that balance. We need to know how to calm ourselves, how to take care of ourselves, so that we can re-engage. So it's a
But just
balance.
that I want to sort of say that again for people because I think what you said is so important, and the fact that you're saying it maybe gives some other people permission. So you are obviously as vigilant as ever, and you're focused in your newsletter, Lucid, and in other places on being vigilant, and you're taking more time to think in this time,
Yeah.
which is not reacting, and more time for friends, family, that kind of thing, right? And I think that's just important for a lot of people to hear. I think people feel guilty about some of those things, and I think it's important to actually not feel guilty about some of
Yeah.
those other things. Um, so there's this story today that about Doge and this like young programmer working for Elon Musk, accessing personal tax
Yeah.
database at the IRS. Um, and everyone watching this, your personal info, returns, whatever now available to these people. It got me thinking about something that I was thinking about writing about, but I wanted to just like try this out on you because that's what we sort of do on
Yeah.
these things. It struck me in this moment of, so you just picture this kind of geeky Doge kid now in the IRS files, obviously working for Musk, who is working for the this president. What struck me about it was the intersection and collision in some ways of two very different cultures in a moment. And here's what I mean by it. There's sort of like a Silicon Valley, McKinsey, Goldman Sachs, like cool-headed business, clinical, just like no humanity, just like go into things, look at spreadsheets, like just
Yeah.
pure analytical brain, right? Which is like it's just like raw capitalism, and it's purely analytic and kind of almost anti-human in its,
Yeah.
and that very much seems to be like the Doge spirit. But then it is intersecting with this other culture that's almost the opposite of that, which is like mafia culture or honor culture, cultures of like vengeance and retribution, right? Which is a
Yeah.
very different, also a business in a way. The mafia is a business, but it's very different. It's about relationships and trust and honor and vendettas and that kind of thing, right? And in a way, these are two business cultures that don't really intersect all the time, right? Like one that the Goldman Sachs way of running a business is different from, let's say, a waste management company in New Jersey that's part of the mafia. But here in the Doge thing, you really have this intersection of like the clinical spreadsheet people put in service of this culture of like retribution, and vendettas and like mafia. And I wonder
Yeah.
how you just see that intersection. I don't know if that makes sense, but how you see that
Oh,
intersection of worlds.
not only does it make sense, I mean, that's what Trump's all about. He's a businessman who acts like a mafia boss. And I'm not the only person to observe that. The whole and our government, I mean, what he did during his first term is that, like authoritarian. This is I think I have a sentence in Strongman that there's a very strong overlap between the cultural the cultural values of organized crime and authoritarianism. And so, um, you know, one of the things they do is that they use public office for private enrichment. They're all corrupt. And so Trump, during his first term, the Washington Post did this investigation. I've quoted it so many times. It's also in my book that through the beginning of the pandemic, so for 3 full years, he spent one third of his time visiting Trump branded properties. So that was the first time. Okay. And there was just endless self dealing. And then Kushner and all that stuff, the trademarks with China for him and Ivanka. So governance is about bettering your business bottom line and using repression at the same time against, people. The other thing is what we're seeing now with it's like who knows what they're going to do with this tax information, but all this data that they're getting on individuals and organizations can is going to be weaponized. So it's like magnifying it at scale, because during Trump 1.0 there were people who had the classic autocratic persecution through their tax records. It's just that they were big figures like James Comey, Andrew McCabe. They had harassment through like audits, and that's what Putin does. That's what Orban does. Erdogan, they all do it. They harass people through like audits. Now, now the entire so like the old school is that you use the institutions to get to people, and you clean out those institutions, you get rid of non-loyalists. Now we have this huge magnification, muskification, or whatever we're going to call it, where the entire institution either going to be wrecked or everybody's data is going to be taken now and anybody can be harassed. So it's like a magnification of that. And the last thing I'll say is that um, I think of Chile a lot. It's a case study in my book, the military dictatorship, because there they had it was a laboratory for neoliberal policies, and so they went through all the agencies, getting rid of the waste, and at the same time. They were certainly using, they were terrorists, they were torturing people. So there are moments in history where these cultures have come together before.
Um, that's really interesting. Another thing that really struck me in recent days, and I'm sure you have thoughts about, is this whole uh, JD Vance JD Vance taking his like gap week in Europe, and
This gap we
getting himself a little Eurail pass, um, and
uh
exploring Europe a little bit. And um, it's not every day that we get to coin a word in the ink, but I don't know if we coined it, I describe what he did in Germany as Nazi splaining, where
yeah.
he went to Germany and lectured Germans about their being too harsh on the AfD party, and essentially told Germany to chill out
No.
about its kind of anti-Nazi firewalls and safeguards, which obviously it has things in its system around speech, around Holocaust denial, around the political process in Germany that are unique, that are not normal in a liberal democracy, but that are particular to that history. And he goes to Germany and Nazi
Yeah.
explains to them that they need to chill out and just, heil a good time. So can you talk about that moment, and obviously the larger, it just the whole weekend, led to, I think, this feeling across Europe that it's the end of the Atlantic era, that Europe is now sort of on its own.
Yeah. So because I woke up in a crabby mood, um, because I'm fed up with everything, but getting new sustenance from doing this. I will say that I have been reading the reports. From the Munich Security Conference. In fact, I was on MSNBC the other day, and in my segment was Ambassador McFall, who was the U.S. ambassador to Russia, and he was in Munich. He was broadcasting from outside his hotel in Munich, and he was saying how shocked, because of course he's in that world, and he said all the European security officials, everybody's totally shocked that of the way that Trump is talking and the Trump administration is talking. And honestly, I thought, why are they so surprised? He's been telling us for years. He's been acting. What about the Russia investigation? What about just on that one thing
This
alone?
European surprise is the most annoying possible thing. Keep going.
And what yes, but what struck me is that the people as a former ambassador, he's talking to top level people. And so these are not naive people. These are people who are living there, they know, and yet they're shocked. And so this, as a historian, who who writes and teaches about moments when people don't quite want to take things seriously because it will compel them to do things. It was like this the whole time in Ukraine. the, a lot of Europeans just couldn't get there to do what was right early enough when it was clear that Putin was weak. They couldn't get there, or they didn't want to sacrifice Russian fuel like the Germans, or it's just, anyway, that's my rant. So
But also, like the thing about this European, like there was all these articles, and the Times had a really good one about all these European officials, exactly as you say,
yeah.
like being shocked. Um, and what it really raised to me is, a, if you're shocked, like you clearly were not paying attention. But more importantly, I have felt, and I've used the same word before in a different context by the Democrats, but I felt profoundly undefended by other supposed democracies around the world, where I don't know, like aren't there entire foreign ministry teams in countries around the world that are supposed to note backsliding democracy, that are supposed to note human rights violations, right? But when America, if you haven't, what I have learned is if you have an aircraft, if you have aircraft carriers, no democracies will say mean things about you, right? And and so when Texas not only gets rid of abortion, but starts, in a very fascistic way, deputizing
Hmm.
anyone to rat out women, and kind of have like a Stasi style informing system on women getting health care. Um, I mean, tell me if I'm wrong. I don't think European countries put out statements deploring it. Did they send aid to women in Texas? Did they do, like, provide funds for women in Texas to go to other states? Like these countries, if you have a problem in some African country, all these European countries are really excited to go help and go say something and put out a
Yeah,
really important statement. But if you have aircraft carriers, you're kind of on your own.
I think it's also, and people could be listening to us going, well, screw, excuse my language, well, screw you, because you're there, in this big, you're not the ones who are going to be invaded. We're here. And I think it's that we're at this historical juncture, and things are changing fast. People are also thrown off by the Musk part because nobody saw that coming, which is that's what coups are. They're supposed to be a surprise. um, but one of the demoralizing things that people don't quite know how to deal with is that it's not just Trump; it's also Musk now, and Musk is on a he's out to destroy every democracy using his own digital and other means. And remember, he's in business with the Saudis and others. But to get back to Vance for a second, so there's a tendency to see, here's Musk and here's Trump, and they're going to start fighting, and only one will survive. And it is true that when you have the power vertical, as they call it in Putin's Russia, there's only one strong man. There's like, here's my book in the background. There's only one guy there. There aren't two. Um, but Vance is the key to Vance is how they're all related, because Vance is the Christian nationalist. Vance is there because of Peter Thiel, and who's part of the Musk techno bros. We want network states where nobody's going to have any laws over us. And it's important that Peter Thiel not only bankrolled his Senate race, but also his businesses. So he's a total creation of these people. And So he's the far right. Now that's why I did that what do you call it? Nazi splaining. He's the arrogant American, but he's a fanatic. That's the key. He's a fanatic, but he unites all of them. He's like
That's a great point. And unlike Trump, he actually believes in the deep convictions of each of these
he
worlds.
does. And this is old stuff, people, because sorry to keep referring to my book, but it's horrible. It's like it's coming to life. It's terrible. I have this business where you shouldn't have to regulate free speech. I literally in the 20s, Hitler was doing his hate speech. This is so he go Hitler tries his putsch. He goes to jail. He gets out of jail. He's got Mein Kampf, but nobody wants to read Mein Kampf. Nobody will even publish Mein Kampf. So he starts going around doing all his hate speech rallies. And German states, individual states, ban him because they don't want his hate speech. So the Nazi Party turns this into Hitler as the victim. And so they do posters of Hitler canceled with his mouth taped shut. And I have one in my book as an illustration. And it says, of all the 3 million people, or of all the whatever, of all the population of the whole world, I'm the only one who can't speak. And this was very successful for the Nazis. It made him into a rogue figure who was like a truth teller. So it's the same trajectory. That's what Vance is doing. He's coming there and saying, why are you regulating speech? You shouldn't be regulating this speech. That's Orwellian. But it's the same speech. It's the Hitler Nazi speech, because there are people in Alternative for Germany who are neo Nazis, and Musk himself did what I believe was a Nazi salute rather recently and addressed that same party. So it's an old playbook, and Vance is key to all of this. It's easy to underestimate him, and in fact, Trump said, "Oh, he's not my successor," recently, because there can only be one strong man. But that's actually a sign of Vance's stealth importance that Trump would feel he has to say that.
Yeah, I sometimes refer to this new crew as Nazis without the jawlines, and
That
it's
applies to Vance for
yeah,
sure.
yeah. Um, so I want your help in prioritizing, and maybe even coming up with a framework for prioritizing. And here's what I mean: the level of insane stuff is immense. I mean, sometimes we're talking about 10 major stories in a day,
Hmm.
and it's too much for people. And the number one question I get from people who are not super politically engaged is just like, obviously, what do I do? Which is where we're going to get to in this conversation. Um, we're going to spend some time on that, but also just like, what do I focus on, right? So I want you to help me with the following thing. It seems to me, in my early thinking about this, that there's a kind of spectrum from dumbass ideas, policy ideas, but like fine to try in a constitutional system. Like you're allowed to have dumbass ideas on the one hand, and then on the other hand, like existential systemic threats to the constitutional order of the republic, right? Um, so I would say, maybe I'm wrong about this, but I would say like tariffs, for example, while dumb and possibly going to produce very bad results, are like normal economic things. Like people have different views about tariffs. I worry less about someone having a view about tariffs that's different from mine than I worry about firing prosecutors or enacting executive orders to ban the 14th Amendment, birthright citizenship, things like that. So but I wonder if you think that's correct, because obviously some of those dumbass policy ideas can be very destructive, can hurt people. Not to minimize them, but how do you think about what you really prioritize as existential for the republic versus this guy has some bad policy ideas?
Yeah. Yeah, that's hard, and that's why I've been trying to step back and think about the big picture, because that tells you what what they're doing and what to prioritize. Some of this is noise. Each thing is important. Um, but I think like the anything to do with the law and the judiciary is really important. There's a reason, Trump said that thing. Who knows if people are like, it's from Napoleon. I mean, it's completely fascist. He said, what is it? If you're saving the country, it there's no violating the law or something like that.
Talk
And
about that for a
this,
minute. It's such an important moment. What was tell
yeah,
us tell people about.
this is like the strong man is the savior of the country, and anything that you do in the service of this. Now, what is he saving us from? Like a booming economy? I do not know. But he, as you know, that's like one of the biggest lines since it was invented by Mussolini, that he's the savior of the country, and so he has to protect the state. And that's the core of the dictatorship in 25 was these laws to protect and defend the state. And so that's where Trump's coming from. And so he's letting people know that he's going to be violating the entire democratic legal order. I mean, the other thing, it's interesting, like the guy already tried to overthrow the government. We had a coup. It just
Right.
failed. And so people aren't talking about that. That's why I also going back to my annoyance with the Europeans being shocked. Like he tried to overthrow the government already. But so I think the judiciary and the institutions, if you have total, we know from the history of autocracy, if you have total control over those and you decide, he's already deciding, telling us who's a criminal and who's a hero when he pardoned those January 6th insurrectionists. Eventually, I mean, if you got to like old school totalitarianism, like Nazism, believe it or not, Hitler's will, his personal will, was the law. That's how extreme it became. That whatever Hitler personally wanted became the law. Um, but you have these things that Carl Schmitt, the Nazi theorist, called states of exception. And when you declare, that's why they love states of emergency, martial law, all these things, because then you can make the law behave in ways that help you, that actually allow you to do lawless things. So that's actually very key. And so it's important that these prosecutors are standing up. These people in the people in the judiciary are standing up and don't want to go along, even in the New York Eric Adams case. Everything that's done in that area is a priority.
Um, you and I have talked about this before, but I came up in the mainstream media. I had worked for the New York Times for 11 years. I still work as a occasional commentator for MSNBC. And I have to say, I mean, all of this information that you and I are talking about, these facts are being reported by these papers. So one cannot
Hmm.
fault them for presenting us with the fodder for our conversation. But at the same time, I continue to be so profoundly disappointed most of the time by the framing around these things. And for example, the Napoleonic quote, it's reported, but the idea that that is basically an intellectual framework for dictatorship is sort of left out of the thing, even though
Yeah.
everybody knows it. The people writing it know it. The people editing it know it. That's how they're talking about it among themselves. But it's in the framing. It doesn't become like this. And it's so funny. I was writing a post about this the other day. Like when I started my newsletter, it was 4.5 years ago. I did not think about it in having anything to do with all these things we're talking about. It was like a thing to connect with people, and it was a fun like way of it was COVID. It was like no one, people were isolated. Like let's connect. And now, and we have 3,000 people watching this live. Like I really feel like, I don't know if you feel like this. You started yours a little more recently, but like we've stumbled onto this new kind of media that is actually able to just say, this is the groundwork for a dictatorship. This is what it looks like to set up this is the intellectual pretext for dictatorship. This is how you go to Europe and say these things. And I just wonder, do you think we should even be investing any energy in trying to push the legacy media to like pull up its pants and get ready for the era that's coming, or is that just over and the future is this kind of decentralized media, the kind of newsletters and other things you and I are a part of?
No, I think it would be a mistake, and I see some journalists have joined while you were speaking. Um, I think it's a mistake to write off anything. We need to use all possible avenues because each one of those um, media outlets has its own public, and we need to reach every kind of public with these messages. And for example, with the New York Times, um, and they've been doing superb investigative reporting, Eric Lipton, like they do superb stuff. As you said, it's the framing. And they're coming along from when Joe Kahn, the executive editor, famously said that democracy should just be a bucket like immigration, the weather, the economy, and here's democracy. They're coming along. But a lot of very influential people, donors, financial elites, the people who can make things happen for a pro democracy movement, including, they read the Times. They maybe don't read they're not into our Substacks. So we have to,
Not yet.
we should, not yet. But it is a relief. I've always been very blunt on MSNBC, and but it is. I started my Substack Lucid in at the end of March 2021, and it was directly spurred by January 6th. And it's interesting, the first essay I ever did was called Drain the Swamp, and it was about corruption, because corruption is a framework for what is going on in our country. The level of corruption is unbelievable. To go back to what you were saying, it's the intersection of the business mentality with the organized crime, lawlessness. um and it is, I feel very fortunate to have my Substack and to be on here and have these frank exchanges, because people need to hear the truth in in ways that, because it can be sobering and frightening, but it allows people to be acting from a realistic basis, and not, and having this framing that's not quite there, that's sugarcoating it, or does not allow people to realize the gravity of the situation they're living in. And that makes you vulnerable, because then it makes you surprised. The reason that I think you and I have been able to come up with uh, trenchant critiques that speak to people about what's going on is that we were never um, in a sugar coated. We understood, and we always thought, um, and spoke frankly.
I don't think of myself as having any bosses that prevent me from saying that this is a wannabe tyrant, that this is someone who's laying a groundwork for dictatorship, that these people are Nazi splaining. I know you don't either, although we have affiliations and we have connections to things. I think, yeah, I think the future of media is more and more going to be people who just don't feel like they are overruled by someone telling them not to say that. And that is your reminder right now. I think that it's really important to support these alternative forms of media. So if you're already a subscriber to the Inc, subscribe to Lucid right now if you haven't. I think Substack even added these little buttons. Some of you, I don't see it right
Yeah.
now, but you may be seeing little buttons during the live. Subscribe to Lucid if you're an Inc person. If you are a
Vice
Lucid person,
versa.
yeah, if you're a Lucid person, subscribe to the ink. It really makes a difference to know that there are lots of people who want a different kind of media out there. And again, like this started as a very personal thing. This is now growing into a media thing. Like we are all,
Yeah.
I'm like hiring people, getting new voices out there. It like we are going to build, I think, something different. And it's going to be more of an archipelago than like five, big newspapers. But we are building something different. And I'll say it very bluntly, like we need folks to support that. If you support that, like the media is either owned by billionaires or it's owned by you. Like it's going to be, it's not that there aren't any alternatives that I've thought of. So sign up for our newsletters, and if you can become a supporting subscriber, we really appreciate it because it allows us to do the things we do and grow and have other voices and all of that.
I think,
So I want
if I could just say, let me just give your, because you're always very kind about Lucid. the we have areas of overlap, but the ink has been really important from the interviews that you do, as well as your own writings about the protagonists of that pro democracy movement. And I have learned so much from those interviews and the wisdom of people. And really is very helpful if you take them together. All that work you've been doing, it's it's extremely helpful with, for example, how the Democratic Party has been too elitist. You've had numerous interviews with people about that. So um, if you don't read the ink, it's very important to subscribe and do so. And I think what Lucid has is now pivoting to focus more on that. It was more educating people about how authoritarianism works. How does corruption work? How does propaganda work? So they're actually very complementary. These newsletters.
Yes, I love that. And I want to ask you that kind of ongoing conversation we have. I feel like sometimes we talk about how to be really clear about what we're seeing, and then sometimes we talk about how to get out of what we're seeing. So I thought maybe I'd like try to pivot us a little bit. And I see in the comments from people as soon as we logged in at 12:30, a lot of people being like, "Okay, this is great, but like, what do we do?" You know, and I
Yeah.
think I'm glad we had the half hour we had, because I think it's really important to actually see and learn to see and understand and put these things in frames that maybe the big papers are not able to put it in. But now let's talk about what people can do. And there's so many places to go with that. There's been a lot of, you know, calling legislators
Hmm.
and people saying how important that is. And we published something from, Katie Porter about how to do it
Hmm.
correctly and in a way that's the most impactful. I think there's, people protesting today and other days. I think there's probably a lot of more invisible efforts out there of creating
Hmm.
forms of resistance that are notable. um, but we got a few thousand, 3,500 people here watching. I'm sure 99% of them are in the market for like things to do. um, Talk to us about how people should be thinking about that, beyond maybe what they already know.
um, well, one of the things that's hard having such a big country is we're not able to know all the things going on. When I had my last, I have weekly Zooms with paying subscribers of Lucid, and somebody lives in Bakersfield and reported. We have like reports from people around the country that 100 students walked out of a high school. I believe it was a high school in protest the other day. And the Bakersfield press covered it, but I didn't know about it. And so I think it's important for us to be chronicling the things going on in our communities and sharing on social media or word of mouth, however you share things, because it would be lovely to have an aggregator, a tracker of local protests, because you can think, oh, well, this is so small, but it's very important also because it's young people. Young people, if you look at the history of resistance, they're always in the forefront of resistance, and what they do is very meaningful. And we've had, before Trump came in, we had a lot of student and other protests and walkouts to against book bans at their school libraries and things like that. So one thing is paying attention to what's going on in your community and taking inspiration from that. Another is I think it's time to flip the script and take some of their slogans and methods that the right has used. I think we have to, like, it's time to take back our country, um, but not for hatred, not and use kind of Steve Bannon was the architect of the precinct strategy. And they've done this for years. They've been very successful. The school boards, the town councils, but that's the precinct strategy. You do it from the ground up. um, why can't we do the same to take back our country, to take back our democracy? Because it's ours. And they want us to stop voting. They want to keep us from voting. They want to intimidate us so we don't even run for office. They've done that with all their thugs. There's again the organized crime methods, right? Also early fascism methods. They used to show up with their black shirts and their clubs and trade union offices, all of this. So investing in your local government, running for something locally, um, can seem like a small thing when the richest man in the entire world is destroying everything, but it's not. We have to start somewhere. And they started there in a way, as well as high level machinations of Trump and, autocrats. They started there.
Um, that reminds me to ask people in the chat right now, why don't, if you have joined something in the exact spirit that Ruth is talking about, if you've joined
Yeah.
something in the last couple months, because of everything that's going on, will you just write in the chat right now, I joined
Yeah.
X, whatever it's called. If you got a link to it because you think other people could benefit from that information, I would just love to see, what people are joining. Indivisible is great. These
Yeah.
50501 protests are really notable and interesting. Um, and also, if you're running for something, by the way, if I've been hearing from more and more people who are sort of as happened in 2017, running for
Yeah.
something local in the way that you were talking about, Ruth. Tell us that in the chat too. And it's wow, look at all this. I mean, it's like a
Yeah.
flicker of
And
joining. I love that.
no, it's important, and I think it's important to support um, the organizations such as Amanda Littman's Run for Something. The first year of Lucid, I was doing weekly interviews with people, and there are other organizations that support. This one is Run for Something is aimed at younger people, um, and I want to just remind people that although we're not having a giant nationwide mass protest right now, one of the reasons that the Women's March and then the Black Lives Matter protests were so effective is that they had electoral outcomes. Thousands of women were inspired by the Women's March to run for office in the 2018 midterms, and the same thing happened with all kinds of people in 2022. And that's when protest has an effect. So, supporting, not only running for things yourself, but supporting organizations that help people to run for things by giving them media training, financial, practical assistance. That's very important. And there are a couple of them out there.
I want to ask you something that feels like it's. I don't have the words yet, but they'll come to me as I go. There's a kind of very basic guttural level question that I have been having and that I hear from other people, which is just like, how could this be happening to our society? And I don't think it's a question about, I don't think the surprise in that question is about the depravity of this small group of people at the top. I think people are aware that there's some rapacious billionaires and that there's some, corrupt politicians and that Donald Trump is who he is. That doesn't feel new or surprising to people. But, in a way, what we've been talking about less, but you know so well from your historical study, is that all of this is happening with a certain abundant permission structure around it, which is the public opinion of lots of people. It may not be a majority, but it
Yeah.
is a lot of people are watching everything that you and I are watching, maybe from news outlets that feed them disinformation, maybe not. A lot of people are watching what you and I are watching. Some number of them have a clear enough understanding of what's going on and deeply affirmatively think that this is okay. And these are not alien invaders. These are uncles and aunts and siblings of people watching this, and friends and people you went to high school with. These are people that I know to be decent in other walks of life, even if things are stretching our current understanding of decency right now. Um, can you just help? I mean, you've seen this happen to so many societies. You can't get to these kind of this level of public support without having lots of decent people being for this stuff. How is this happening, for lack of a better term, in terms of lay public opinion and people in this country, in my mind, a good and decent country at its core? How is this happening?
I think like if you look at when this happens, we fit the pattern in that when societies have had a lot of progress, could be workers' rights back in the day after World War I, also gender emancipation, can be racial emancipation, period of a lot of progress and racial equity. When you have that, um, that's when societies are ripe for some demagogue to come along, or various, with all the allies in the religious sectors. A lot of people feel they're losing something. They feel dissatisfied, and so these groups, these messaging from the pulpit, from Donald Trump, wherever, they know how to weaponize these feelings. And so racism, homophobia, misogyny, kind of savage capitalism, all of that gets supported, and it, comes together as a kind of reaction against progress. So it's almost like a counter revolution, and that's how I've and we were ripe for this. We had 8 years of President Obama. We had legalization of same-sex marriage, women admitted to combat, and the reaction there is Pete Hegseth. Um, and so it's like we were tailor made for this. And so that's part of it. That's like a big thing. I would not underestimate the disinformation piece. Trump has been doing this for a very long time, and Fox News even longer. People have had now 15 years of intense, messaging that's telling them to that's trying to destroy and discredit democracy, any democratic institution, any democratic understanding of society, about mutual tolerance, multi-faith, multiracial. That democracy, what Trump wanted to do with Fox and all his other allies, was to present democracy as failing, and the Biden administration became the symbol. But it's bigger than that. So somehow he's one of the best propagandists in history. He's so good at what he does. It's scary. I don't say that lightly. um, so he managed, with a robust economy, and millions and millions of jobs created, to make people think, as he said, that America was garbage, that America was failing. Why is it failing? Because of democracy, because non-white people are getting too much power, all of this stuff. And so he becomes the savior. To come back to the savior, what is the saving? The saving is saving America from this kind of democratic progress. And then, we're in the middle of a particularly savage, in the sense of intensity, reaction to this, because they're not just trying to roll back the clock, they're actually trying to destroy entire institutions, right? Destroy entire agencies. So that's where we are. But I think
I
disinformation is huge, because it gives people believe what they want to believe. And if they feel racist ideas that were not, that they didn't feel comfortable saying in public, having Trump out there and all his collaborators being racist and saying things that they would like to believe, that they know inside may be not true, but they want to believe it, shifts the whole climate.
I agree with that so much. I would say, from my point of view, the disinformation thing arrives in a vacuum that is created by a failure to manage social change and social
Yeah.
progress. And you and I have
Yeah.
talked about this before, which connects your first point to your second. And I will say, like, this has been my obsession, and this is where I think for all the loathing I have for the modern right, I think this is where a lot of the blame is on the pro democracy side, on the Democratic Party side, on those of us who actually love and approve of these social changes in recent decades. I think we are a much better job of fighting for and getting social change and progress than realizing that social progress, as you rightly say, is inherently stressful and hard for people. By the way, it's stressful for its beneficiaries, not just its losers, right?
Yeah.
I mean, there's so much research on all the multiplication of choice that women have in life to work, have children late, have children early, marry, not marry. It's a huge multiplication of freedom for women. It's also an enormous multiplication of anxiety and stress and like choices that used to be easier because you didn't have any, right? And so
Yeah.
no one wants to go back to that old world, but progress creates anxiety. Progress makes
Yeah.
it very hard for people to know who they're going to be on the far side of change. It is harder if you're a white man, but I don't think this is just a conversation about white men. I think it is, we have lived in an age in which we have discounted. We've just treated, it's very laissez-faire in a way. It's very libertarian. Like, we just do social progress the same way we deregulate markets, except it's a good thing in the case of social progress. We just do social progress, and then we're like, figure out your family. Like, okay, like the gender hierarchy is changed. Like, figure out your families. Okay, like you now have to deal with types of people you've never had to deal with before. You weren't raised to deal with before. Good luck, right? You now have to deal with people of a race where you were miseducated about them in school. Like, good luck, figure it out. Read some books on your own time.
Yeah.
Join a book club,
Yeah.
and this kind of laissez-faire attitude to the psyches of people in our country. As someone who's a like, I should have been writing about this more. I mean, I have written about it a lot in my career, but clearly not enough. And I wonder if you think it's too late in the game to think about that work as part of the resistance, that work of making Americans less afraid of progress and telling stories about progress that will actually allow people who are rattled by change to see themselves in that. Do you think that's something we can still do, or has that ship sailed?
No, it's really important. And it's going to be more important than ever because uh, there's going to be a big, I wrote a lucid piece about this, that a reckoning is going to come. Um, that the things that are going to go on with, economic downturns, all the fallout from the stuff that's being set up now, the wreckage of institutions, the tariffs, it's going to be massive, and people are going to have a bit of a wake up call. And that's an opportunity for us to be contrasting, what was promised to people. They thought they voted for him because they thought, the price of eggs was going to be helped, which is valid. But then what will be ensuing will be quite different. And I think that it's never too late. If you say it's too late, then it's kind of giving up in a way, right? Because we're only, what's the date today? How long has he been there?
February 17th, 2038, or something like that.
Okay. Yeah, and then, he was inaugurated, and it was only after that this Musk business started. And so we're still getting to come back to where we started. We're still getting like, okay, what's going on? What's this Musk business? The 19-year-old, somebody called Big Balls, who wears boxer shorts, is like stealing our data. I mean, we're still like catching up. And so it's never too late. We've only just begun.
A couple of things I want to get to before we sign off. Speaking of too late, or not too late, can we just talk about the Democrats for a second? I understand that these are hard jobs. I'm sure people look at you as a professor and are like, "Why don't you do this? Why don't you do that?" And you're like, "Well, you don't understand my job." And people say things to journalists all the time. You're like, "Well, you don't actually understand what we do." So I'm sure there's some Democratic lawmakers out there who are like, Ruth and Anand don't understand how hard it is. They don't understand the pressures on us. They don't understand our secret game. But let's just set that aside. You know, I'm just in shock, with the exception of some people like Chris Murphy, AOC, and others. I mean, this is the most lost, feckless, useless political party in a time of real need that I have ever seen. I struggle to think about what any of them are doing. And I wrote this last night. Sometimes I say these things, and I get phone calls and texts from these people in Congress or Democratic official being like, "That was really unfair. You really overstated that." When I in the last few weeks when I've been saying these things, I get phone calls and texts being like, "You understated it," from like senior people in the party being like, "No, no, no, you have no idea how bad it is. No, 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 you have no idea what a shit show the campaign actually was. No, 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 you have no idea that the DNC is actually not a real political party. It's like a fundraising vehicle that has no actual presence as a party, right?" how obviously one political party is not our only deliverance, but how do we think about the problem that is the Democrats?
Well, one to be I'm not really being sympathetic, but we have a very unusual situation. There are people here from other countries that we only have these two parties, and so each one of these megalith parties is many parties unto itself. Like, remember, AOC famously said that in another country, because she thinks globally, I wouldn't be in the same party as, I think it was Joe Biden. I forgot who. It
Yep.
was either that or Nancy Pelosi. So they have to do many things. Um, but the fact is that uh, yes, they've been extraordinary. It seems as though they've been very absent. And part of this is that they I think they concentrated on elites, on big donors, and they don't have a ground game that's good enough. I'm not an expert on the Democratic Party, but it seems to me like they don't have a ground game that's good enough, and enough integration between the top elites and the bottom to move quickly in a crisis, because we're in a crisis. We're in a terrible, terrible crisis. So there's that problem. It's like a horizontal problem. There's many amazing messengers from the Democratic Party, Maxwell Frost. There's a million people who are individually good. I love Sheldon Whitehouse. He gets corruption. He's out there, but the structure somehow is not. When it's so large, the structure is not built to respond to a crisis efficiently. Perhaps it's that. That's the charitable
Yeah, that is very
explanation.
charitable. It's probably true and insightful, but it just feels
Yeah,
this sense of defenselessness that I think we've talked about in the past as being such a theme of the age in many ways.
yeah,
It is just being so compounded right now. And yes, you can find this example of someone saying something, and there are these many people who are exceptions to the rule, as you were citing. Um, but institutionally, it just feels like an incredibly weak, insipid organization that in this current structure and form needs to go. Like there needs to be a different form of what this party is. It needs
yeah.
to become an actual party, not just a fundraising vehicle. It needs to get its heart right on whether it's a billionaire donor party or a people's party. It has almost no salience and relevance in most working people's lives, the people it claims to speak for. It is not physically engaged IRL in ways that center left parties need to be historically around the world to like actually it's just not around. It's not handing out turkeys to
Yeah.
people. It's just not around.
I mean, out of crisis comes reform. Out of crisis can come revolution. And we hopefully will get something better out of this crisis, because what we have now is woefully inefficient and insufficient.
Yeah. I sometimes I wish I didn't have young children and could actually, be part of fixing that party, but I it's not a it's a jungle that does not appeal to me, sadly. I want to ask you before we go to go back to this question of what people can do. Um, so we talked about joining things. We talked about local offices. Um, I wondered if you could just draw on any examples from history, any stories from history that would illustrate for people examples of how normal people, ordinary people, doing what might have seemed small at the time, what might have seemed not particularly significant at the time, ended up being more significant in the rearview mirror of history. Are there any examples that stand out to you that might be a place to leave people?
I think just um, s- supporting those who are doing the right thing, even if even if that's our also doing the right thing, letting them know, because we're not a police state yet. You can still write to people, you can speak out and let people who are doing things that are courageous, let them know that you have their back, because we're very quick to criticize people. We don't always think to to do positive reinforcement. and every act of resistance helps others to feel empowered. So that kind of, um, even if you're not personally in it, letting people know who are out there today with the protests. I couldn't be there myself, but I support you. And then we are in a social media age, which is different than some of the times I've studied. And you can um, you can help circulate news of these things. So that's a very small thing, but with a big, if it's done by many people, it has a big effect.
Great. And my chime in on that is that I was having a conversation with someone the other day, and um, this person was in a very kind of sad and dejected and kind of almost like tragic place with regard to everything happening. And that's
Yeah.
very there's very valid feelings. Um, and my response was that, um, although it may sound harsh to say it, like you're not, none of us is entitled to live in a better time. You're not entitled to live in a time in which this is not what public opinion is. You're not in, I mean, in an ideal world you would be, but like human history is a rough story, as you know better than
Yeah.
most people. You're not entitled to live in some kind of time. You get the time you fight for. You get the opinions, a climate of opinion around you that you're willing to persuade around. And so this is not, I just want to reframe for people. It's what I'm telling myself every day as much as anybody else. This is not a tragedy. This is an assignment, you know?
Yeah. It's an
Um,
assignment. Yeah.
and it's not something to consume. I grew up, when I would go to India as a child, it was like a very permanently dysfunctional, corrupt political system in which no one ever assumed that the government was doing anything for anybody. And I remember like all my uncles would, like, they talk politics incessantly, but it was always just kind of this like, ugh, these damn politicians. Ugh, no one ever did anything. No one ever ran for it. If anybody's child, God forbid, wanted to enter politics, that uncle would have been the first to say no. It was just this kind of, it was almost this like aesthetic of just deploring politics while just going about your life and
Yeah.
making money
It's
in business and paying bribes yourself if you needed to for your factory or whatever it was. And uh, and they all experience Indian politics as a tragedy, not an assignment, right?
yeah.
And I think I would just leave people with that place of, this is an assignment. It's not just a sad story to consume. It's an assignment.
Yeah. And someone just posted, hope is an act of resistance, and never get cynical, which is what you're describing, a situation of cynicism in a way. Um, and without, because that's in Poland, they used hope, they used optimism. That's a whole different discussion, perhaps for next time. So thank you all. I've got to
Thank you all so much
go.
for joining this. As always, we're going to post the video in just a few minutes. I'll send it out on the ink, and maybe we're talking about, small media and big media and legacy media and new media. When you get that email, send it to 10 people who you think would benefit from this conversation. Maybe they'll join the next one live. And we really appreciate all of you. I know Ruth and I are both trying to build something that is different and appropriate to these times, and adequate to the task before us. And we take this assignment seriously. So thank you, Ruth, so much. I really
Thank
appreciate
you. It's
you
always a
as always.
pleasure. Thanks to everybody. See you next time.
Bye.
Bye.